Welcome back to part 2 of my zombie containment chamber control panel build. So now it's time to install some LED lighting. We have to do it now because we're not going to have access later after I add the rest of the framework inside the box. So before I installed the LED lighting, I wanted to get an idea of what kind of acrylic sheet I should use for the top of it. So I went with an opaque white acrylic sheet. I just bought it on Amazon. It's rated 32% translucent. But prior to making the box, I did some testing with some LED lights just to see how much it was diffused, because I wanted to get a general idea of how far away the LED light should be from the acrylic so that you don't see each individual bulb, but it looked more like a even flow of light. Again, I want to make a surround on each panel that looks like there's neon or it's glowing or something to that effect. So here I'm just using a DC power supply and 2 LEDs hooked up just to kind of get an idea of how far away the lighting should be, and I figured about 3 or 4 inches was ideal. And now that the box is built, I can start installing the LEDs, and I'm going to use the LED strip lights that I've used before in my haunted house. So here I'm just using a Forstner bit, and I'm drilling a recess for the start of the LED strip light so that I can have the plug down below with all of the other electronics. So I spent a little bit of time obsessing how exactly I wanted to install this LED strip light. Shocking, I know. So I went kind of round and round and thought the best way to do it was to actually cut the pieces to length as close as I could get it, at least, and then solder them together so that I could get true right angles and I didn't have a bunch of funky bends in the strip light. And I had soldered this before. I had some ambient light that I used in my home theater at our other house, and it's not that difficult, it's just really tedious. So I'll kind of go over some tips and tricks here to make this work. Before I forget, if you notice, I did paint just the top half of the box on the inside white, and that's just so it acts as kind of a reflector for the LEDs. So here I'm just using a hot glue gun to secure the strip light because the adhesive back... Well, first of all, I've used this strip light before in a haunted house, and it still has the adhesive backing on it, but it's kind of in bad shape. So I'm just using a little hot glue to kind of help me out here, and some 3-2-1 blocks to kind of hold everything in place as I go along. So they make it pretty obvious on these strip lights where you can cut it. They actually have a little cut line every 3 inches or so. And the first cut, I'm just using a razor knife, but it didn't really work that well. I found what was easier to use is just a good pair of wire cutters. So each connection is going to be made by 4 separate wires, and you can use whatever you have laying around. The smaller the better, and I like using stranded wire. The first thing you want to do is tin it though with some solder, and this makes attaching it to the terminals a lot easier. So the first thing you want to do is where your cut is, you see the 4 terminals there. I'm just going to use a hobby knife, a little X-Acto blade, and I'm going to cut through the back plastic. It's actually on there, it's some sort of adhesive, so it's kind of a pain to get off, but you really need to expose that copper and then clean it so that you can get a clean solder joint. And now I'm just using a hobby file to rough up the surface a little bit and clean it up a little bit more. On some of them they got so gunky, I just used a little bit of rubbing alcohol and a clean cotton swab to just clean the residue off of the copper plate there. Now I'm just heating up the copper plate with the soldering iron first, and notice that I'm actually heating it from the cut side and then putting the solder from the opposite side. I found this worked best. That way you don't run the risk of melting the adhesive and just gumming up the surface and making it that much more difficult. So you don't have to do this. You could try doing it with just by attaching the tinned wires, but you see on that terminal there what happened is it didn't want to take the solder. So you either have to clean up the surface or clean your soldering iron and try again. So here I just had a dirty soldering iron, so I'm going to give it another go. And you can actually tell that when the conditions are just right, because it sucks that solder right onto that little terminal. So now that the hard work is over with, you can see how easy it is to attach these wires. You just barely heat up that solder and those wires just go right on there, which is nice. And I will insulate these wires with just a little hot glue. I'll throw a little hot glue on there, and then once it dries, I can bend them to 90 degrees and continue along until we get the entire framework covered with these strip lights. So now I'm just using a continuity tester to make sure that the end of that wire is only touching the terminal that it's soldered to and not the neighboring terminal. If you don't have one of these continuity testers, I recommend that you get one. I use it all the time, especially if you're doing any type of electronics for Halloween. Now I'm just using a little hot glue to act as my insulation to cover those bare wires. I could have used heat shrink tubing, but I didn't want to get too fancy because you're never going to see this. And a little hot glue works just as good as anything, especially when you're dealing with low voltage. These are only 12 volts. So I ended up splicing this a total of 8 times, and I'm pretty happy with the final result. Just checking the colors here. I like these strip lights because they give you options. The remote gives you options, because I don't know, maybe I want it to be green, or maybe I would want the outline to be red. I'm not going to know until the final prop is set up, but thinking blue would be good. Now I'm just going to peel back that protective paper on both sides of the acrylic sheet to see how it looks. Again, if you are curious to see the rest of this project and you want me to post more videos, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching.